Alrighty, just waiting for some people to come in, possibly. Had a little bit of difficulty getting this thing working, but I think it's good now. So I'm Danielle Bohmir, and I'm a little bit new to your community, or at least the people who have this Greene Fyre page. I've been in the psychedelic community a lot, and when I say psychedelic, I guess I don't necessarily mean drugs. I mean, like, thanks, Will. I mean the culture around it, you know, New Age, spirituality, and I guess paradigm shift. So a lot of the time in that subculture, I sort of try to help people to open their minds a little bit more. A lot of the people over there politically, they are, their tendency is to lean to the left a whole lot, and I guess that there's been a lot of propaganda on that side as well, you know, both sides, but there's probably a lot more on that side just because of all the craziness with Trump's whole election and all of that. So, you know, I just try to kind of ease people a little bit out of the box because, I mean, they're very open-minded people already. You know, cultures, subcultures, all that is just so fascinating. So, anyway, today I'm going to talk about censorship and just about social programming and how it works and overcoming political polarization, which is really important, you know, just methods to do all that. So a lot of people have been dealing with bans, you know, shadow bans, post blocks on controversial posts, you know, out of the box topics, all that stuff. So I think that's really an issue because, you know, we don't want to become even more divided than we already are. I've seen some improvement in this area, actually, as far as people who, you know, were very taken to the propaganda and social programming. A lot of people, you know, actually kind of getting out of that. So, you know, we don't want this backlash to fuck us up. So basically, okay, Hillary Clinton had a tweet the other day that I thought was pretty scary. It said, "We should all care about how social media platforms play a part in our democratic process, because unless it's addressed, it'll happen again." So when she says unless it's addressed, I mean, is she, you know, insinuating that we need to censor people? I mean, that's the first thing I thought. Like, if anybody else has any other interpretation, you know, please share it, because I'm interested to see what people thought. What else could she have been referring to? You know, I don't care how you feel about Hillary. That doesn't matter to me. But it's just the sentiment of that post was a little bit scary to me, just in light of the fact that so many people have, you know, been banned lately and posts have been blocked, all of that stuff. So the first thing I thought when I saw that was, do you mean, you know, no more free speech? Do you mean people having opinions? Because social media, that's all that is people around, you know, sharing their opinions, posting memes and things like that. I mean, obviously that can affect an election, but that's because of the transference of information. I mean, people talk about things and share things with their friends, and social media just happens to be the biggest way that people do that nowadays in this culture, in this time. So I think that basically, I mean, if say we didn't have the internet, you know, that would be basically like just saying, oh, people talking and sharing their opinions affected the election. I mean, that's been going on for a very long time, way before we had social media. So social media is just a platform, and on the internet there is more of a way to censor it. There's just more of a means to do that. Even though the internet's great, you know, it's changed so much. I'll get into that in a little bit. But to address censorship, first we have to discuss what propaganda is. There's a whole lot of weaponization of words. There's formation of connotation and stereotypes. That's a really big thing. So I think that a lot of the time what social programming does is it plays on our innate human qualities, you know, our instincts, our predispositions, our fight or flight instincts, really. I mean, it's really deep stuff. So there's certain predispositions we have, you know, when we're confronted with people that have different opinions than us. and you know, they basically activate that and play off of it, profit from it. You know, the media does this. I always find it funny when I say like they, right? They. But anyway, you know what I mean. So this is why they use that division tactic to get people to conform to either side of the two parties. You know, they do that by hyping up the news stories, using and creating specific words and ideas. That's something I want to talk about specifically, is connotation of words and stereotypes to be associated with those words in our minds. I mean, we're basically being programmed to be triggered by specific hot button words and topics. So when words are stereotypified, later on we have reactions to them in our minds. We associate them to all these different things. And have you ever had somebody say to you, you know, if you have this political view, then you must be blank, blank, and blank also. I mean, that's a really big failing type of logic, I think. And it's specifically because of this kind of social programming and word weaponization and attachments, associations, formation of associations, and it creates a false logic. So basically then bait is set up in news stories at like specific times. You know, it's very systematic. Skewing and hyping the story, using specific language, installing those hot button words of topics. So basically it gets people to argue, become more supportive of one side of the political party system. I know you guys know that already, but I like to talk about the whole mechanics of it, because if you can understand the mechanics of the whole thing, there are ways to get around it. And if you understand what someone's doing, sometimes you can kind of go through the lines, you know, code a little bit, I guess. So basically this whole thing, you know, creates bickering. Our emotions are manipulated. I like that, Allison. Yeah, exactly. Right. If you are not X, you have to be Y. I mean, that kind of polarized black and white thinking, you know, red versus blue, left versus right, like all that. I mean, it's really kind of delusional when you really think about it. So basically what we need is to unify or transcend that whole polarity, because that whole psychological complex is really unhealthy, and it creates so many problems. You know, whether or not this is done intentionally by some sort of entity is up for debate for some people. You know, some people think that things just happen randomly, but no matter what is happening or who's doing it, or whether it's intentional or manipulated, I mean, it's still not good in any case. Like, we can agree on that, right? It's still not good. Speaking of the whole thing with like conspiracies and all that, like conspiracy is a good example of a word that has been weaponized. All a conspiracy really is like a group of actions that go towards a certain direction, and usually it's intentional, but it doesn't have to be. I mean, conspiracy is basically like a synchronization of actions that goes to a goal, you know, an end point. In the chain of reactions. And this happens all the time. It happens in our own brains with our action potentials. I mean, with the electrical action potentials in our brain even. I studied psychology, so basically, I mean, these are kind of, this whole process, whether or not the neurons fire in synchronicity, is really similar to what happens as far as actions being set up politically, and people choosing certain viewpoints, and you know, it basically gets to a tipping point and reaches an end game. So there's an end game. So even just the small act of being okay with someone who disagrees with you goes a really, really long way. You know, it might sound counterintuitive to some people who are, you know, really likely to just argue right off the bat, or, you know, shove your views down people's throats. If we really want to do that, I mean, I guess we can have a chance after we calm the tone of the interaction, maybe ease into it a little bit. That's important. You know, if we're going to try to open people's minds to, you know, new ways of thinking, and critical information evaluation, I call it. We can't just be, you know, shoving our views down people's throats or insulting them. It's not going to work. So as far as the internet goes, you know, information is always coming at us from every direction, and we're always at odds on which information is safe to trust, you know. And I get that there's groups specifically dedicated to evaluating information and figuring out, you know, what we should trust, you know, what someone's agenda is, where the funding is coming from, where it goes to, how a person or entity could profit or benefit from a circumstance. So if you know the motivations of the players in the game, you can make better guesses as to what information you trust. But disinformation is where things start to get a little tricky. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the internet. The reason things have gotten so crazy lately is because we haven't yet adapted to the way that the internet is, basically. I mean, it's so different from how it used to be. You know, it gives us a lot of power. It gives us the option to share whatever information we would like. It allows the truth to be out there, but we have to sift through all the bullshit. You know, we can meet like-minded people. That means we can unite with people who have a common goal and a common intention, and that's really important. That's where we use the internet to our advantage, you know, and we can't let that be taken away from us. That's really important. So a lot of people haven't really psychologically evolved to handle our technological changes and how this has impacted our culture, basically. A lot of people are very overwhelmed by this whole change. You know, we're hanging in the balance. A lot of people still fall for the bait that leads to our division, polarizes us furthermore. We have a chance for humanity to evolve our social systems as well as ourselves by being able to adapt to the way that our new information flow goes. I think this is really important, that you know, evolution, that what I'm going to talk about, what evolution is. You know, we have a chance to transcend and actually evolve. So when I talk about evolution, you know, transcending polarity actually kind of is what evolution is. But the definition of evolution is. It's a metaphorical definition, but it still is nonetheless. You know, it's taking an environmental circumstance and a being, an organism that has a physical or mental state which falls short. Therefore, a conflict will arise. A conflict which actually threatens the survival of the organism, or, you know, the species as a whole. So does our current political state threaten our survival? Yeah, it very well could. So we need to learn how to adapt, learn how to handle the responsibility that comes with the global connectedness that our internet brings us. This is our unification or transcendence from that polarity. So I've only been banned once, actually, from posting a picture of the Texas shooter. I don't know why I was banned. Like, someone said they hadn't seen a picture of him. I posted it because, like, they wanted to see it. And it said it goes against our community guidelines. I don't know why. It was just a picture of him and a gun, and from his Facebook page. And there was another post that I guess that it was like some sort of Students for Democracy page, maybe, or like some really official big page for democracy, it was called. And they had posted a picture of the shooter. It was the exact same one that I had posted, and it had like thousands of likes, you know, everybody commenting on it. And the only difference between what I posted and what they posted was it said, this is what America, this is what a shooter looks like. So that's what it said. So, I mean, think about what that whole thing insinuates. I mean, this is what a shooter looks like. Well, what does he look like? He is a male, he's white, and he's young. Like, so it basically takes stereotypes and says, like, what really simple things about what this guy looks like this is what a shooter looks like in general. So it's basically like making us use that stereotyping behavior and then use it to apply it to other situations in other shootings, and think to ourselves, well, it's always white shooters, you know. And I mean, maybe there are a lot of white shooters, there are. But I think paying attention to that whole thing really kind of takes us back. You know, it really doesn't allow us to evolve. It really doesn't. So, I think that it's really important for people who realize these things to be able to share it you know, with other people who don't. And all the tact and diplomacy are really needed, especially at this time when people are getting banned and, you know, shadow banned even, which is pretty, I don't know, it's weird. It's weird to me to be posting something, not even know if people are seeing it. I mean, sneaky. A lot of things like that are happening, so we need to really use that tact. I think it's very important, you know, to use your profile for not only political stuff, you know, but also personal stuff. Even if it's something that's not really that important, sometimes it's good to just put those in, you know, in between your political posts, because that way I think it really helps, because I think the algorithm definitely catches, you know, if you are only posting political stuff, it's more likely to, you know, to get you to say, all right, you can't post that, you know, you're a bot, right? So, let's see here. You know, on that whole thing, the Great Awakening, I don't know if any of you have seen that whole thing. It was on the same day as the fake news awards. And there was an article that came up that said that all the people who that day who were posting, you know, hashtags like the Great Awakening and the Storm and We the People, it was really popular on the QAnon group. And basically they were banning everybody that day. And the article later on said they were Kremlin-linked accounts. So yeah, we've been talking about that whole thing, you know, the Russian bots and all that. I'm sure those have been mentioned by a lot of people in this whole marathon. So yeah, basically, you know, on the internet, you don't see someone's face. You know, you could say, oh, that person's just a troll. That person's just a bot. Anytime that it's something that you don't want to post. So yeah, that's definitely one of the agendas in that whole thing, is censorship, and, you know, actually getting into people's minds, making them think like, oh, don't pay attention to it. They're not even a real person. So yeah, that's pretty messed up. But you can, you know, I think one thing that people did during that time is they used the Me Too hashtag with kind of like a double meaning. Like, I don't know, me too, I'm joining this movement or whatever, but it wasn't, you know, the original movement for women's rights. It was kind of a play on the whole thing. And by using those tags, I think it helped a little bit with the algorithm, because it's like, oh, that hashtag's a popular hashtag, so, you know, we're not going to ban that person. So basically, you know, obviously another good thing is to put your text in photos and use videos and things like that. Videos are really good because it's harder for the algorithm to look within a video and see what the message actually is of somebody saying. This is really interesting about language here, okay? Sarcasm, figurative language, or metaphor is very important. Like, theoretically, we could create an entire metaphorical language where we had different symbols that represented the things that we're talking about. And you could share that instead. And then there would be no way, if the censorship gets really bad, we might have to create our own figurative, metaphorical language to get around it. And it would take a really long time to, I guess, add all the new programming to an algorithm to catch things like that. I guess that just people who tend to be creating social change, it might find it right away. I don't know exactly how the algorithm works. I'm not a programmer. I am a psychological programmer for sure. But that's another issue entirely. Definitely related. So weaponized language, I think we should avoid. Because when we use language that's already been weaponized, you know, it's more likely to be, you know, a trigger point for people. It's a lot more likely to make people pissed off and less likely to listen. You know, they'll come out of left field with some crazy other political issue that has nothing to do with what you're talking about, and they'll like join it to what you're saying and say, you know, say that you're insinuating something that you're not at all. You'll be like, where did that come from? So yeah, weaponized language is really kind of not good to use. Either we don't use it, or we have to find ways to kind of sneakily get those weaponized words to mean something else by using the same tactics that were used to weaponize the words in the first place. We kind of have to like reverse engineer the process and change it. And a good way to do that is through humor. Humor is a transmutative, I guess, it's a process that really changes the way people think about things, because when you laugh, literally your neurons, you make new neural connections in your brain. It's like the same thing as awe or religious experience when you laugh. There are studies about this. So when people laugh or take something not quite so seriously, it actually changes their mind, literally speaking, biologically speaking. It's a really good thing. Anger does this too, anger and stress. And I think that anxiety and stress are what the media are playing off of and making trigger points. But the other side of the coin is humor, because it's, taking things a little more lightly, not being so serious about everything. So we use that to, with our memes and, memes or posts or anything like that. And I think that utilizing irony and satire is really important here. Yeah, irony and satire are really powerful because people use humor to stay sane, and it's a great influencer. I think that the mainstream media loathes the fact that humor exists. They want to take humor away from us, pretty much. I mean, by making everything politically correct. It's not okay to joke about that. It's not politically correct. It's basically something that people they don't want people to have that humor, but nobody can take humor away from us. I mean, that's why the censorship actually is so dangerous, because, they're trying to do that through the censorship. So transmutation is a really good way to use the nature of polarity and solidify it. So irony often involves sarcasm and facetiousness. It expresses a concept that merges opposing forces in an inherent way, either emphasizing an unexpected outcome or a double meaning or a metaphor. So it often kind of illustrates a closed loop, I call it, a paradoxical sort of concept. It's a lot more difficult for algorithms to detect that because it's really a complex mechanism. And constructing memes or statements to have double meanings can be effective because that sort of gently brings people outside the box. One meaning might apply to the right side of the political spectrum, and one might apply to the left side. And that's what's so cool. I've seen memes that do this. I wish I had an example right now that shows the whole thing. But basically, the right will take it one way. They'll think it means one thing as far as, their views, because people are likely they want to see what they believe in. They want to see something that goes along with their worldview, the way that they see the world. So they might see that, and then the other side might see it a totally different way, but it kind of merges, the underlying message merges the two sides and actually says that, there's one meaning that both sides can agree upon. I mean, even if it's really vague, even if it's very general, I really think that both sides actually do want the same thing. Everyone wants happiness, wants peace, wants people to be able to get somewhere with their goals and all of that. Some people don't really care. Apathy is definitely dangerous, even though it doesn't seem like it would be dangerous, but it is, because I think that that's what the media really wants us to be, either angry or apathetic, either not wanting to make any sort of social change or being angry and feeding into the division. So those are like the two things that I think they would want us to be like. So yeah, those sort of memes are very important, that appeal to both sides of the political spectrum in different ways. And I think that that should be a goal for people. So I guess to conclude this whole thing, I want to talk a little bit about the concept of polarity, like on a metaphorical sense. Let's see here. So when we come to the concept of polarity, we have the power to utilize our understanding of it to, I guess, heal the repercussions of the propaganda and weaponry, use it to our advantage. So think of it like a math equation, where an operation's applied to the absolute value of a number. I mean, you apply two things to it, the negative and the positive side, and that way it kind of takes it to another level. That was a little bit vague here, but what I'm going to say next might make a little more sense. So I don't know if you guys know what non-duality is. Basically, non-duality is the concept of oneness. It's the concept of unification of opposites. And I think in general, that's something really important. You know, for me, I've really changed my mental state a whole lot by, I call it marriage of opposites. It's kind of a thing that I do in my own mind psychologically to help myself to be okay with negativity and problems in life. And it's been really, really effective. And I think that when we talk about this concept of non-duality, when I talk about it, it's not, I'm not just talking about the political spectrum, literally. I'm not just talking about black versus white racially. I'm not talking about male versus female gender-wise, which is definitely, gender is definitely a big thing that's been manipulated, by the way. And it's on a really deep level. See, that's what I mean. That's what I meant earlier about playing on our deepest instincts. You know, sex and gender, very ingrained things, really deeply ingrained, root, base, primal things. That's what they're playing on. I kind of got a little sidetracked there, but I remembered that was important to mention and to overcome, because all these labels, you know, with gender, it just gets kind of crazy. I think that people should just be who they want to be, and, you know. So, I'm going to give an example of root forces and how they can be filtered through duality. So when we think about like just the main force of life, creation and destruction, those are very, very primal things. You know, that's basically the building blocks of reality. You know, creation and destruction. Those are actions that we do to build our reality or change it. So I would say that a lot of the time destruction comes from fear. And fear is a very ego-dominated force. Basically, I think that fear evolved at the point that we were separated consciousnesses. I think that, you know, consciousness in general theoretically could be, you know, a big, it's basically an overarching thing that creates our reality. You know, consciousness is, we recognize another being for what they are, and that feedback, that recognition of being, you know, like that takes communication, and it keeps on happening. That's what continues the whole thing. So when we think about fear versus love, you know, love is what creates reality entirely. I mean, it's passion. It's, you know, what we want to do, the things that we want to create in this reality. I think we create them out of love. I mean, sometimes it can be done out of fear because we might create a barricade to protect ourselves or whatever, but that gets a little more complicated. That also has to do with fear. So if we can think of fear versus love, the filters which we see the world through, when we place that filter over, it results in like two different ranges of positive and negative emotions. So the base force of arousal filtered through fear would be anxiety, and that force of arousal filtered through love would be excitement or passion. So that was only a really abstract example, but I gave it because it's really general and easy to understand, I think. So understanding this concept, we can sort of vaguely apply it to what we're trying to do, you know, solidifying the polarity in general. When we act out of love and, you know, our desire to help humanity as a whole instead of further divide people, I think that that's a worthy cause all the time. So basically, when we understand the methods of propaganda and weaponization of language and how they're done, we can reverse engineer it. We can take those tricks, use them for ourselves in less sinister ways. But we do this because we care about humanity as a whole, you know, and not just about ourselves, not just about getting money and power and all that bullshit. You know, that's not going to go anywhere with us, you know, when we're gone. It's not actually going to mean anything in the long run. And I'm talking long, long run. Yeah, you need to have money to survive. Okay, that's important. But who needs that much money? If you have that much money to the point that you could donate that money to, and solve the issue of world hunger, but you don't do it, then I don't know. That just sounds like a really, like you've got to be pretty messed up in the head to not want to do something like that, I think. So the end of this whole thing is coming. The end is coming. I hope you enjoyed my live stream. It was my first one I've ever done, so I was really excited about it. I've really been wanting to get more into activism for a long time. I mean, since I was a child, I somehow thought that I would end up getting caught in some sort of political conspiracy. Like when I learned about Watergate, the first time I learned about Watergate, I was fascinated by it, even though that was probably an altered version, you know, for the history books, a watered down version of the whole thing. But I was just fascinated by that. And I just had this weird feeling that I would end up in a political conspiracy. And I guess we all are, so it ended up true, right? I mean, there's always been conspiracies, and we don't have to worry about it. It's not like, ooh, conspiracies. It's like a group of people that have a goal, and they use the programs that they have all across the board, you know, healthcare, banks, everything, schools, you know, teaching the young, use all of that together to a common end. That's a conspiracy. We need to forget about all of the craziness around that word. You know, when you hear the word conspiracy, you don't have to think about like a nut job in his mom's basement, you know, or whatever. I mean, they happen all the time, and that's all right. We just need to do our part and try to ease all the anger and all the fucking polarity. So yeah, I tried to not curse that much during this whole thing, but I had to a little bit for emphasis. So I'm really glad to be here and get this chance with you guys, and really love you guys. Thanks for doing what you're doing. I really appreciate it, like from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.